But Joseph's brothers said, "What if Joseph still bears a grudge against us and pays us back in full for all the wrong that we have done to him?" But Joseph wept, and he said, "Am I in the place of God? Do not be afraid. Even though you intended me harm, God used it for good." You may be seated. You've heard it said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But I say to you, love your enemies. Now, probably the first time that you ever heard someone say an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth was Jesus telling us that we've heard it said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But he had heard that said, and his original audience had heard that said many times. An eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. You know why he said that? It's a great part of our tradition. It was a restraint against violence. It's Mosaic law. An eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. And by the way, if we could just get back to that, we would be doing pretty well. What it means is, if you take my eye, I can't take anything more than yours. If you take my tooth, I can't take anything more than a tooth. See, when we see each other, and we do wrong against each other, we want more than an eye. You take my eye, I want both of your eyes. I want your body. I want everything. Teeth as well. Gandhi was right. He said, by this philosophy, all of us are going to end up blind and toothless. And yet again, it was a restrictive sort of commandment. Don't do more than this. And yet, we live in a world that always does more than that. Does not restrict violence. Violence breeds violence. And so Jesus comes along and he says, you've heard it said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, but I say to you, love your enemies. Be kind to those who curse you. If somebody hits your cheek, give them the other one. They want your coat, give them your shirt. Now, I don't know how to live this out exactly. Never have. And yet, I don't think that Jesus was spiritualizing this. I think he was trying to tell us how to live as Christians. And oh, that Christians would live like this. I've many times had Christians tell me, well, I hear the Beatitudes, which is Matthew's gospel, and this sort of saying, but I live in the real world, right? I live in the real world. Well, how is that working out for anyone? Do you like the real world? And you say, well, there's no way to live out this gospel, except people did. One of them was named Jesus. And what I noticed watching the great civil rights documentary Eyes on the Prize with my daughters, somebody else did, named Martin Luther King Jr. He turned the other cheek. He loved his enemies. And the world that we live in right now is better because he did. Transformed because he did. I don't know if you've noticed a lot of countries and populations where oppressed people finally got a little bit of power. It didn't work out really well. And yet it did somehow here. Because this man took seriously the words of Jesus. In fact, what he said was he built the entire civil rights movement on these words of Jesus. And yet when I hear them, I think, how am I supposed to do that? Or live into that? I live in the real world, but it ain't working out for me. It's a vicious time. I don't know if you've noticed this thing called Twitter. It's not making us better. I mean, even email, like, I have good friends and they'll email each other, and before you know it, they're going at each other on email. They would never do that face to face. And social media is that on steroids. And I don't know what the answer is. I have myself been guilty of doing wrong and all of that. But my hope and my trust is that what Jesus' version of the world is the version of the world that we can have, if we will but try. So I don't know exactly how to love my enemies. I was telling this morning, Shelley and I, when we first got married, we went to Thanksgiving dinner with my Uncle Cal. Now, Uncle Cal was kind of a special person. Uncle Cal sang, for instance, at all of mine and my sister's weddings without being invited. That's true. He pulled that off, and he always knew, he always knew everything. And one time, when we went to Thanksgiving dinner at his house in Memphis, and I had just become an Episcopalian, and I'll be honest, I was a bit broken, and we had been around the block and just kind of hanging on for dear life. Uncle Cal wanted to tell me everything, in his estimation, that was wrong about the Episcopal Church. The funny thing, what he really, hung all of this on, was that all of you only listen to priests, which I think is funny, being a priest for 20 years. I mean, so he told me, y'all depend on priests or whatever. It was this kind of bizarre way of thinking that we were overly clerical. We're not, by the way. And I'm sitting at the table with my Uncle Cal, and he's telling me everything wrong with the church that I'm in now that really kind of saved my life. And he's just kind of railing at me. And Shelley looked across the table, and she knew that it was not going well because my fork was shaking. I was so angry. And I got up, and I let Uncle Cal have it. And he deserved it, I mean, I gave it to Uncle Cal. He probably remembers that to this day. Uncle Cal got it. And I also ruined Thanksgiving. And I went outside, and Shelley came behind me, and I kind of collected myself a little bit, and then walked back in and said, I'm sorry. I wasn't sorry because he was right, he was wrong. I was sorry because the world didn't need me to add that to it. In some way, in some form, this world needs us to tamp down the rhetoric, to somehow find a way to build a bridge. You've heard it said, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. I say to you, love your enemies. Be good to those who curse you. Find a way to build a bridge. Find a way to be a Christian. The reason this is here right now is we baptized this morning 5 people into the Christian church. And you know what the world needs right now? It needs Christians to believe Christianity. It needs us to act like what we say is true. I 100% believe that God is calling each and every one of us to make a difference in this world, and I don't know when this world is going to change for the better. But I really believe, given our history, people like a great prophet, Martin Luther King Jr., it's going to happen through people that really embrace our faith. May we do that. Amen.